There are many different types of listening that we could potentially engage in. These include discriminative listening, informational listening, critical listening, and empathetic listening. Let's start by looking at discriminative listening. Discriminative listening is a primarily physiological form of listening that happens when we are just scanning and monitoring our surroundings in order to isolate particular auditory or visual stimuli. This is the most basic form of listening that we engage in, and we are generally engaging in discriminative listening all of the time, right? Our ears are constantly looking for that kind of stimuli so that we could potentially react to something if we needed to do so. For example, when you're driving down the road and just listening to your music, all of a sudden you might hear sirens behind you. And when you hear those sirens, you know that you should look into your rearview mirrors to see if there is an ambulance or a fire truck approaching. And if so, you know that you should pull over to the side of the road so that they can get by as quickly as they need to. And so discriminative listening is happening automatically. We do this when we are in a crowded room and we hear someone call out our name. Our ears are picking out that stimuli, right? And we're saying, what? Someone called my name. So we are just using discriminative listening to scan and monitor our surroundings. Informational listening is listening with the goal of comprehending and retaining information. Informational listening happens in a lot of teaching and learning contexts. So whenever you are sitting in a classroom and listening to a teacher talk about that week's chapter, you are engaging in informational listening. Hell, you're engaging in informational listening right now by watching and listening to this video. But we also engage in informational listening when we listen to news reports and briefings at work, and even when we listen to our voicemails. If we are trying to comprehend and retain information, we are engaging in informational listening. I do this kind of listening all the time. I listen to a lot of podcasts every day that talk about the daily news, that talk about the politics of the day, and that just teach me about random stuff, like how jigsaw puzzles work or how the Rosetta Stone works, right? I learned recently about hurricanes and lobbying and all kinds of really interesting things. So you never know what you might learn when you engage in informational listening. When we are engaging in critical listening, we are listening with the goal of analyzing or evaluating a message based on the information that is presented to us, and based on the information that can be inferred from the context of the message as well. So a critical listener is evaluating the message and deciding whether they want to accept the message, reject the message, or if they want to withhold judgment and seek more information. And we need to become better at critical listening so that we can learn how to evaluate the messages and determine whether we want to accept or reject those messages. And then finally, we can engage in empathetic listening. This happens when we are trying to understand or experience what a speaker is thinking or feeling. So when we engage in empathetic listening, we are listening to feel into or feel with the speaker, rather than just feeling for the speaker, which would be more sympathetic listening. To draw that line a little bit more clearly, sympathy is much more self-oriented and distant, so you are experiencing the thoughts in your own head, whereas empathy is much more other-oriented, so you are putting yourself into their shoes and experiencing what they are experiencing, and it should be genuine. Keep in mind, however, that because we do empathetic listening in a lot of our really close interpersonal relationships, that sometimes when someone comes to you to be an empathetic listener, sometimes that person just wants to be heard. Sometimes they don't want our feedback or our advice. They just want us to be a sounding board and to be an empathetic listener. If you're never sure about whether somebody is coming to you with a problem and they want you to just be an ear to listen or a shoulder to cry on, or if they want your actual advice, the best thing you can do is to ask them, to literally sit down and ask, okay, I hear you. Do you want me to give you advice, or would you rather I just listen to you? And let them decide. But we engage in all of these different kinds of listening on a regular basis, and it's important for us to be able to engage in these various different listening types and to get good at listening in these different ways.